So good morning and good afternoon. I'm Sian Yates and I'm the Senior Editor of FoodBev Media. I'll be hosting today's panel discussion, which is about shelf-stable produce. And there are quite a lot of things to consider here when manufacturing products that are shelf-stable. And I'm hoping today that we can gain a bit of insight into some of those elements and talk about things like sustainability, food waste, quality and nutrition. So thanks everyone for joining me this morning and this afternoon. And if we could just start by going around and briefly introducing ourselves. So Greg, if you could kick us off, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sian. So yes, I'm Greg Clayton. I am the head of the market strategy and understanding team at Ipsos Mori. For those of you that know Ipsos, you may be familiar with the political polling that we do, but the commercial side of the business, and I just run one of the teams within the commercial side of the business. We really focus on consumer research and making sure that we understand the market landscape, consumers' attitudes and behaviours within that, and how to help our clients message appropriately to our customers and obviously commercially to increase share and so on. But here today, I'm going to be talking about representing the consumer view essentially, and making sure that we understand how the complexity of the landscape from a consumer perspective and how we can help them to navigate that.
Okay, thanks, Greg. And Bengt, if you could introduce yourself too, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Bengt Eliasson. I work for Tetra Pak Processing Systems, and I'm globally responsible for the dairy ambient category. And I'm based in Sweden. Hopefully, I can bring to the discussion with over 30 years of experience from the food industry. So,
fantastic. And Renuka?
Hi everyone, good morning and good evening. I am Renuka. I am shelf life and sensory expert in Mumbai, India. So we in a team work on how shelf-stable products could sustain throughout the supply chain, and how can we work upon packaging to get the sensory attributes of the sample, keep the sensory analysis intact in place and will not hamper. And also we are now looking to develop some kind of nanotech packaging materials which would help better in the supply chain.
Great, thank you. And Neil?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Neil Shackleton. I'm the founder of Medoola. Medoola is a sustainable packaging, retail and supply chain consultancy. We deal primarily with major CPG companies around the world. We have three kind of pillars to our business, which is innovation, optimization and sustainability. And we have a model which we underpin, which allows us to do all three at the same time. So very interesting time for us as a business at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. So if we kick off with a few comments on sustainability, I know it's quite a huge area, and I think you'll all have quite a lot of expertise in this area. So Greg, if we could come to you first, how do shelf-stable products play a role in the sustainability of a supply chain?
Yeah, no, shelf-stable products and sustainability. I think it's obviously from a manufacturing point of view and from a nutrition point of view, it's hugely valuable that we're able to provide products around the world that last. I think being able to support public health in that way and public nutrition is vital. But I think that the thing from a sustainability point of view is just how complex it is for consumers to navigate the landscape. There are so many messages out there around produce and trying to understand, weighing up all of the different options that customers have got in front of them is really, really challenging. Every company messages slightly differently, and I'm sure Neil will be able to talk to this separately, but every company wants to be unique. Every company wants to differentiate. And because of this, messages get very confused. There are some research that we undertook within Ipsos identified that there are 87 separate eco-based labels that go onto packaging to represent either the packaging or what's within the packaging. And how on earth a consumer is meant to weigh up 87 different options at the point of purchase is beyond me. It's beyond any of us. And so from that point of view, one of our strong positions around sustainability is that we have to make it simpler for consumers to navigate and understand the decisions that face them. And we can go on and talk about some of those decisions in due course, but that for us is the core basis of the challenge that industry faces at the moment.
And do you think that's a particular issue for shelf-stable products?
I do, because we're weighing up so many different sort of aspects of it. The packaging obviously is an aspect of shelf stability, but what customers don't recognise that sits beneath that is the risks associated with food waste, for instance, the risks associated with transit costs, all of these things which have a detrimental environmental impact, which aren't the visible thing. They're not the visible manifestation of what the consumer is faced with. And so I do think that there's a big impact for shelf-stable products, because it isn't just a simple story. There are multiple facets to it, and I'm not sure that every consumer has the opportunity really to understand those, because messages are distilled and simplified for them, and therefore they're making decisions without necessarily a full assessment, weighing up a shelf-stable product with fresh produce that's been flown in from Chile, for instance. You've got two very, very different sustainability equations in each of those instances.
Yeah, a very good example of that is some of the environmental claims you do on a package. It's very much based on, the production step of that product, not necessarily taken into account the distribution chain all the way out to consumption. Yeah. And I think here the shelf-stable products play a really vital role, because there might be slightly more, energy and demanding in their production step, but that is easily recovered during the first day or two during a cool distribution chain. So, the energy demand totally is typically much better for a shelf-stable product than for a cool chain product. And that might not be so visible for the consumers in the end.
Absolutely, that's the point I was going to make, Bengt. That weighing that equation up for a consumer is really challenging, because the level of cost and investment that's required to get products to shelf is something that consumers simply don't have visibility over, and there's so much messaging.
And of course, another aspect of that you mentioned is the food waste.
Correct.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point about food waste. And I would like to go into a little bit more detail about that in a second, but I just want to come back to the packaging issue and get Renuka and Neil's views on that. Renuka, could you maybe talk a little bit about sustainable packaging in this area?
Yeah, so here when I study on the shelf life analysis for multiple products that are coming towards me, so these are all the natural produce. So they are like, they don't want to add antioxidants, they don't want to add any kind of a preservative kind of thing, but they are like, we are ready to work on packaging, but we need to keep our product shelf stable. So here the challenge comes is, when it comes to juices and all, there are issues like browning and enzymatic browning on all those issues. So the thing is, we are working on type of packaging which will replace the silicate or you can say silicone layer of the packaging material, which will help. We will be replacing with kind of a packaging which is developed with the help of fruits and vegetables waste, and that will replace the silicone, the material kind of thing. And this we are trying so that the product which is there, the person who is aiming to develop a fresh product will fill the product in it, and he can sell it throughout. So while it goes to the vendors, when it goes to the wholesaler, we need to see that the product is handled properly throughout. But the thing is, because of very less knowledge and like we know, these people do not have kind of a technical knowledge, so they don't handle products properly. So because of that, there is a lot of food waste happening around. And to stop this, packaging is something we need to develop upon.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this packaging technology that you're developing, and which products it will be kind of best used for?
Okay, so currently we are looking this packaging to be developed for beverages, basically the fruit beverages and the soy milk and the plant-based milk, basically. So the thing is, now here packaging material is not proper, or maybe the vendor is not holding a good packaging quality. So we are looking that we'll develop something that will be pocket friendly for a person who is developing a product, and it will help everyone to get the better result of the product. So that is all we are working upon. So basically, for now we are working on beverages, but yeah, in future we will also look for other stuff which are like organic in nature, because organic is something in India which is now getting a very good hype. So we need to look for that.
Okay, great. And Neil, would you like to add some comments there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gone really into the details. So I just want to take a step back and just to kind of pick up from where Greg left off, if I can. So sustainability at the moment, we are all confused. I don't know anybody that's confused. I live and breathe this day to day. I speak with brands, with companies. I speak with government officials, and everybody's confused. And the thing is that from the top down, we can't even agree on the definitions of what we're trying to achieve. And if we can't do that at the top, you can imagine what the poor old consumer is thinking. You know, the added to the 80 plus on-pack claims there is, you know, if you add the product into that, then there's over 400. And each one of these needs to resonate with a consumer and have a belief factor. And because there's so many, you just don't really know what to do. And I think added to that is that we constantly try to put a plaster on the problem to fix it. So sustainability has three big areas. It has social, it has economic, and it has environmental. And we are constantly picking one trigger out, one subset of this in order to try and solve it. So we think there's an issue with plastic, we try and solve it. It's a plastic crisis. We think it's greenhouse gases, we try and solve that. And this is the thing, we never fix any of the problems. We just make a big song and dance about it. And all this does is create more confusion in the minds of consumers. You know, you talked about food waste. I mean, Boston Consulting just did their piece very, very recently, and they're saying food waste globally is worth $4.3 trillion. So it's huge. And you have over 200 companies that have already signed up to the UN 12.3 for 2030. In a lot of ways, this could be the next thing which people are going to jump on, food waste, because we've almost gone too far in one direction over the last couple of years to try and look at packaging and say, okay, it needs to be better, it needs to be recyclable, it needs to be more lightweight, we need to drive out weight and everything we possibly can with packaging, but we've almost forgotten that we need packaging to protect our products. And this
and that messaging, Neil, just to jump in and support your point, that messaging around packaging and that demonization of packaging almost has been so successful that Ipsos research recently has found that 85% of people, when buying a product, their number one concern is about reducing the amount of packaging it's in. That's a noble claim, right? Fine, good stuff. All well done, everybody. But not unpicking the depth of story around that, as you were going to say, Neil. So I'll let you continue, but I just wanted to throw that point in because it is so, these messages that we focus on, the media picks them up, they become part of the narrative, part of the social narrative, but they don't represent the whole story by any stretch of the imagination.
It's very true. I mean, one case in point that I normally talk about is the definition, which is now, I think, in the dictionary, which is single use. And obviously it's generally got plastics attached to it, but it's single use product. Now, I continually have debates with people about what single use actually means, because what people fail to forget is even if it's a carbonated drink, for example, in a PET bottle, that has to have some shelf life. So it's not just a simple, it goes on shelf one day, we drink it and we throw it away. And people forget that. So a lot of the work we do, and especially client work, is run looking at the evaluation of what the client needs to achieve, which markets they're going into, how long they need to be stable for, and then overlaying the sustainable values across it. So, for example, we do a lot of life cycle analysis work, and we can build all these factors in. And sometimes it's, we have to be bold enough to go against the tide of emotion, because it's a very emotive subject. But we need to rise above that to explain to our consumers the reasons why the particular products remain in particular materials and why we need this. And it's not being done to a big extent, because clearly at the moment we're still in this kind of world where a quick PR win puts a few points on the share price. But we need to start thinking about this, because fundamentally, if we don't, we'll start making the wrong decisions, which will mean that from a consumer's point of view, we won't have this 365-day availability of everything we want on shelf. And we're going to generate more food waste. And also, we're going to have shorter shelf life periods. It's as simple as that. It needs to be built into this kind of sustainable system thinking that we try and drive.
Yeah, and of course, this is also linked to food availability and food safety.
Absolutely. I mean, if for shelf stability, there's so many factors that if we go back 5 or 10 years and we were doing a packaging project, these would be paramount, of absolute importance. Now, sustainability has come along, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be part of the discussion, but there's a very fine balance, driving out material to reduce weight, for example, and then not understanding the impact that light can have, coming through thinner materials. All these factors need to be addressed. Otherwise, what you do is you spend an awful lot of money developing the wrong solution.
And do you think maybe the whole message has just been completely overcomplicated when really it should be a lot more simplified?
Well, I think we reached a point in time where we were waiting on government legislation to tell us the silver bullet answer as to what we should do and what we didn't. Now, the thing about it, that everybody's supply chain is unique, and there's going to be a lot of different variables in the analysis. So we're going to get different results in different situations, and this takes us away from any kind of silver bullet. But I think we're trying to address the emotive content of sustainability. And we're losing sight of some of the other factors. And the thing is that we work with a company in Australia, not in the UK, but they're the only company we've worked with so far that have been bold enough to stick with the materials, not to adapt their packaging because it wasn't right. And the way that they did this is we helped them communicate that message out to their consumers and say, we're not going to be emotional. We're going to stay where we are. It's right for us as a business. It's right for you as consumers, but we want you as consumers to play a part. And the bigger part for consumers was to be more responsible. Don't just accept that putting it in your bin is going to make sure that something gets recycled. There has to be more to it. So that was a very successful campaign that we did with them, and it's generated a sales uplift. They now have websites going out there. The interaction with the consumers is really on point, and the consumers are buying into it because there's a believability to the story. What I see elsewhere at the moment is everyone's kind of almost slightly afraid to go against the grain, and clearly that's a sad state of affairs, to be honest.
But that kind of education that you're talking about there, Neil, I think is absolutely vital. I mean, we're all very familiar with the say-do gap, right? Where the consumer says one thing about their sustainability behaviors and does something completely different. And sometimes that is down to flagrant hypocrisy on the part of the consumer. And sometimes it's just that there is a barrier to actually behaving in the way that they say they would like to behave. But increasingly, we also think that there's what we're calling a sort of a believe true gap with consumers, where what a consumer believes may not actually be representative of reality. And the reason for that is what we've been talking about here, this massive plethora of messages they're bombarded with. And how are you supposed to cut through them and actually work out what is the truth, what's the reality of these situations? You really can't. And it's down to manufacturers and businesses to make sure that the messaging is consistent and provides as close as possible to a sort of a single source of truth that consumers can get behind and understand that what behaviors from a consumer are actually going to be the most impactful. I mean, we all know that recycling your Coke cans or your Coke bottles, whatever you were talking about earlier, Neil, is a good thing to do. But do we really know how efficient that is in terms of recycling, in terms of sustainability and the broader environment than other activities? I mean, we all know, I think it's fairly widely publicized that the best thing you can do for the environment is not to have more children. but is that something that really is resonating with people? Are they understanding that, or do they think that actually I'll have 5 children, but I'm gonna recycle my Coke cans, so I'm doing good for the environment?
I think where they're at the moment is, and you know, I use the term loosely, but greenwashing seems to be the term that people are using, and that there is so much noise now that we've actually reached a point, especially in the UK, where the consumers are just suddenly starting turning around going, I don't believe any of it. So now you've got to prove to me. But the positive of that is they're starting to challenge all the things that they've been told. So for example, you know, kind of 2 years ago, we were on the plastic crusade. They're starting to challenge, because a lot of the messaging I get from kind of anti-plastic establishments, for example, it can't be recycled, it takes 400 years to degrade. We're now proving that that's not true, and we're communicating that out, and it's beginning to make consumers challenge the perceptions, because ultimately, for me, all materials should have a place. It's about finding the right material for the right solution and then driving that through. And that, you know, that's new innovations and that's existing materials. And I think that's starting to resonate, although it will take time to remove the massive barrier, especially for plastic that's been put up. And the thing for me with this is that we point the finger at something that can't answer back. You know, a material is never going to solve all our sustainable problems. So we need to think laterally, because we constantly do this. You know, we will constantly say, point the finger at a manufacturer about food waste, and then, you know, we'll move on to something else. So we've got to take responsibility, but that responsibility goes all the way through the chain. So as you said, Greg, you know, it starts at the manufacturer, it goes through the brand, through the supply chain, through the retailer. And I think also what we really need to do is we need to kind of create more visibility in that end of life, because at the moment consumers just don't believe that anything happens or anything gets recycled. So how do you create the story that actually shows them that by being more responsible, they're adding value to the process?
Yeah, very interesting point. And often reading about different materials, plastic does, pardon the pun, get a bad rap. But actually there are so many benefits to using it. You know, it's perfect for protecting food and beverage. It's lightweight, it's cost effective, and I guess it's about actually remembering that, yes, if it ends up in a landfill or an incinerator, it's not great for the environment and it's not great for anybody. But actually there's quite a lot of work going on in this area to make it more sustainable and biodegradable.
Yeah, sorry, Sian, just interrupt. The food waste problem will be so much bigger than a landfill problem. And therefore, we need to think about how we use materials. I mean, it was the retailers themselves that brought plastics into the equation in the 70s, and they wanted that because they wanted a bigger range of foods and they wanted more stability. So it's kind of, to turn away from that now is probably not the right thing to do. But there's so many, you know, there's so many opportunities here. Because, you know, as I said, consumerism is not going to go away, and our expectation is that we're probably going to want more, not less. You know, and I don't think we can turn that tide, or should we?
And Renuka, you're working quite a lot with different packaging materials in terms of to sustainability. Do you have any further comments on this point?
Adding to it, we also have developed blockchain technology for tracing the products forward and backward. So here, what in the software, what people, one company is working on it. So what they have included is every detailed information about the manufacturer or maybe the farmer, and then the blockchain, the data has been there inside, and then when we scan the QR code given on it, we can get the information like when was this packed or manufactured, is it organic or not, if it is, then from which variety, and all this information. And there, this helps actually people to know what they are eating. So the motive behind it is. And then when we look into traceability into blockchain, the thing is, we come to know whether the product is safe or not. If not, they can just take it back and withdraw. So these are the things we are working. Like this has started since like last year, and it's going very good effectively. And also there are things like indicators. So now this is something that I'm thinking about, like to develop some kind of an indicator in packaging material, which will indicate, like there will be a color system which will indicate whether the material inside is fresh or not.
That's really
I mean,
interesting.
there are already some technologies there to detect whether a cool chain is broken or not. So
Yeah,
that is available on the market actually.
Yeah, these are.
Yeah,
Also,
data collection on that. But you know, one thing to remember if we lift the discussion a bit to that is that most part of the globe does not have access to a reliable cool chain. So I think that's why, you know, shelf-stable products, you know, the aseptic technology, it's, for me, that's really food distribution 2.0. It solves a lot of problems globally in the distribution of safe food.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's an important aspect. And then the other thing, linking back to the, you know, the complexity, I think with that type of technology, we actually reduce complexity in the food chain, because we reduce complexity in production and in distribution of food. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a quite a robust, you know, technology to distribute the food.
Mm-hmm. And Bengt, you yourself and Tetra Pak are working a lot with dairy products, which are notoriously unstable.
Yeah.
What kind of activities are you doing here, particularly within things like the cold chain, which, like you said, not a lot of people have access to the fresh product. So how is your work helping here, and what kind of things are you working?
Yeah, but we are both working on, you know, the technologies, how to retain as much of the nutritional value as possible in the product during production. And of course, we are working with the packaging to keep the nutrition for as long time as possible. But it's also things like Renuka was talking about, you know, the enzymatic stability, the quality attributes of the product once it reached the consumer. These are also things that we have looked into in quite depth. So really trying to secure, you know, both food safety, but also food quality in the end. Mm-hmm. And you know, everyone benefits from a long shelf life of a product, because that makes distribution easier. So very important aspect.
How do we kind of come away from this idea that a shelf-stable product isn't as good as the fresh version of itself?
It is a mindset that is definitely there in the traditional markets where you have a cool chain, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got evidence from Ipsos surveys that we've conducted that local provenance now, and read into that what you will, but it obviously tends to refer to the freshness and the immediacy, as well as the lack of sort of air miles associated with it. Is really, really important, but in markets particularly where access to local produce is good. So in markets such as France and Spain, where freshly grown produce is readily available, that is a number one concern for people, that their products are locally sourced. But there are many markets around the world where it's impossible to source good quality products locally. And similarly, your typical Spaniard or your typical Frenchman will still probably want cost-effective fruit and vegetables and so on from other markets that need importing. And so there is, whilst there is a trend to this and a growing realization maybe that local is the best thing, and local sort of self-sufficiency even is a trend that's becoming more and more prevalent. The reality is, on a mass scale, that shelf-stable packaging is something that's absolutely vital to be able to provide the benefits of fresh, nutritious products to markets where they don't exist in the local environment. And
do we think that the COVID pandemic has kind of put shelf-stable products back on the map, so to speak? I mean, a lot of people were out panic buying and buying things that would not go off in a few days. So I wonder if maybe it's had a bit of a revival through this.
We can see that on some markets for sure.
Yeah.
Very clear indication on that, yes.
And Greg, from a consumer perspective, do you think, have you seen anything of this?
But I think it's linked to the yeah. I mean, everyone is aware of the situation we have had the last year, so it's quite convenient with a shelf-stable product, especially if you can go to the store just once a week, or it's convenient simply. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But another thing we also see is an increased interest in these, health concerns or solutions to health concerns, like immune-boosting products, basically things that strengthen your immunity. It's quite a big thing for consumers.
Okay, and I guess the other thing at the moment that's huge, I mean, it's probably even gone beyond a trend, some would say, but the whole plant-based movement, which is obviously a massive part of everyone's lives, not just vegans and vegetarians, but also people that still consume meat and dairy, flexitarians, if you will. Do you think, Bengt, do you think there's a difference between the two products when it comes to shelf stability, between plant-based and dairy? Sorry.
There are differences, of course. There are differences. I wouldn't say that's sort of a main concern for consumers. They tend to be more forgiving to plant-based products and the quality. If we talk about separation issues in a package, they live with that if it's a plant-based product. It's sort of, you expect that you need to shake the packet a little bit. If it would be a milk, it's not accepted for sure.
No, you're right, Bengt. It almost represents authenticity of the product, doesn't it? The separation almost is a quality stamp for...
a little bit like the cream layer in UK in the past.
Yes, exactly. I remember it fondly from my childhood.
Yeah. But I would say it's really a complex question, also linked to sustainability, and of course most plant-based products are regarded as more sustainable, and in many cases it's true. In many cases it might not be the full truth. If you have cows feeding on grass on land where you can't basically grow any other crop, that would be, to me, quite a sustainable sort of way of producing milk. On the other hand, you have milk produced in these mega farms where all the feed is grown in huge monocultures. Probably not the best solution. But on the other hand, you have a similar situation for plant-based products. That could be grown in huge monocultures, not really in a sustainable way. So it's really a complex question, as Greg is saying, mm-hmm. And for a consumer to judge what is the best here, it's really impossible, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. And I think maybe one major reason for this transition to kind of a plant-based, meat-free, dairy-free is health, really. And I think health is a huge thing, especially at the moment, like you were saying, with immune boosting products. It's on people's minds at the moment, and as you know, do you think that there still exists this perception that shelf-stable products aren't nutritious, or they're unhealthy? Renuka, maybe we come to you. Do you think shelf stability has an impact on the health content of a food or a beverage product?
Yes, definitely it does have, because when we do shelf life analysis, we have it in, like, when we do the study, it is in phases. So we come to know in which phase the product is degrading, like from what phase is starting to degrade. So the thing is that gives us a fair idea like how it will perform in the market. So yeah, definitely it affects the nature of the product, plus the packaging material affects the nutrition value of the product. And what here we can think about is adding kind of a bacteria into the packaging material, which will help food stay shelf stable throughout. But then, yeah, those are all the studies. But then it is actually necessary.
I think one interesting aspect comparing plant-based product with traditional dairy products is that in Sweden, which is a very traditional chilled market, we have a fairly good cool chain. Basically, all the dairy products are in the cool chain. Almost all plant-based products are with ambient distribution.
Okay.
So obviously, it's something also linked to tradition here. The dairies traditionally use the pasteurization technology and a cool distribution chain. The plant-based producers, they start basically from zero. It's new companies. They enter the market and they pick what they feel is the most sustainable and cost-effective way of producing, distributing their products. And they have ended up with an ambient distribution and an aseptic package. I think it's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, from a consumer perspective, this just represents another of the myths that we've been talking about, that fresh food is always better for you than packaged or frozen or whatever the treatment that the food has taken. And again, there are companies trying to dispel these myths, highlighting the fact that frozen or packaged food, shelf-stable food, is actually better for you in many instances than the fresh variety itself, because the fresh, so-called fresh, has actually has been flown in from the other side of the world, has been sitting on the supermarket shelf for 4 days, whereas the frozen or the prepared product has been prepared at a site half a mile away from where it was grown, and has actually had has kind of retained a lot of the nutrition that is lost in other formats. So again, it's all about these myths, and over time, the myth of fresh being best has become cemented in the consumer mindset to the point that actually there's a rejection of alternatives, which may actually be providing and retaining the nutrients in the food and drink far better.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that goes back a little to Neil's point that saying about just all these different labels on everything, and there are a lot of complexities. And Neil, do you have anything else to add in this sense, this kind of the health content of these shelf-stable products?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one, because you think about, again, from a consumer's point of view, you think about the amount of information that's on pack anyway. And we used to work off the old kind of 3-second purchase decision, going around the supermarket and saying, okay, I'm going to have this and this one. Whether you're online or whether you're going through the supermarket now, you're expected to take the pack, you look at the nutritional value, look at the contents, look and see whether it's gluten-free, whether it's vegan. You're looking for all these factors. Then you're looking to see what the packaging is. Then you're looking for the best before date. And you take your 10 minutes in and you pick one thing up and put it in your basket. And I think, again, it's this kind of information is not a bad thing, but we're almost throwing too much information in too many different areas now, which is, again, it's just adding to more confusion for a consumer. So clearly, if you live a plant-based lifestyle, you know, the way that everything is now focusing is you will go to that category and you will purchase those products. But I still think there's almost a hidden element around that, because, you know, you look at some of the plant-based foods that you can pick up and the amount of additives and things that are in there to try and prolong the life of that may actually make it less nutritional than something which isn't. It's just this constant conundrum of activity. The only other thing I was going to mention was just going back to a point that Renuka mentioned about shelf life indicators. Now, they have, in various guises, been around in the market for some time, but that is technology. But for me, technology is always about the introduction at the right point. So we ran a pilot with a company in dairy, actually, and this is going back probably 6 or 7 years when the technology was quite fresh. And it worked absolutely fantastically, but what it did is it pointed out the massive holes in their supply chain and where the inefficiencies were. And this was just too much to swallow for this business. You know, so it's kind of almost Pandora's box again. So, you know, bring the technology in at the right point, but be careful how you introduce it, because you can certainly cause more confusion.
Yeah, huge issue. We've actually come to about the 40-minute mark, so I think if we just go through kind of closing statements, and I'd quite like us to think about really this idea of where the responsibility lies when it comes to sustainability and food waste, and you know, who we should be kind of looking to for more help. So if Greg, if you could maybe just provide some final comments on that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, from my point of view, I mean, the crux of this comes down to the bombardment of messaging that consumers get and how on earth they're supposed to navigate their way around it. Do we place responsibility on the consumer to educate themselves on this? Well, I think, as we've agreed, it's impossible to, because the messages are so diverse, so varied, so competitive in many instances, because what does a manufacturer want to do? It wants to sell you their product and not the next one. So these messages are becoming more and more extreme in many instances. It's not up to the consumer to try to navigate that. It's up to manufacturers to be truthful, to be honest, to be informative. And as Neil mentioned earlier, to be highlighting to the consumer the impact that the consumer can have in perpetuating positive sustainability behaviours. What are the right things that a consumer can do? What are the things they need to look out for? What are the things that really don't make any difference, despite the fact that they might have been heavily publicised in years past? How can a consumer, what does a consumer need to do? What do they need to weigh up? That, to me, a simple cheats guide as to what you really need to look at when you go to the supermarket, and not Neil's list of 18 different things you look at on each pack. Which are the two that really, really matter? That's what I would love to see emerge from this.
Fantastic. And Bengt?
I think what is really needed is sort of really an industry collaboration along the value chain here. That it's no single company or producer that can solve the challenges here. It's also about legislators taking a more holistic view, as I see it. They can't pinpoint, you know, plastic bag tax as the only solution. That will not work. Huh? But that's what they tend to do, you know, recently. You see this very sort of directed actions that doesn't solve the problem really. We probably also need this more collaborative way of working through the value chain between companies, rather than to really just look at your area. So that's a little bit where I see, and I mean, it's a huge challenge, this to provide safe food and to make sure it's available, at the same time address the sustainability issues. So a huge task. It's not the single player that can solve it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. yeah, definitely seems to be the case that it's not one body and it's not one area of the supply chain. It's really a meeting of all minds to create some real change. And Neil, I think you were kind of touching on this earlier anyway, but did you have any final comments?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing about it is kind of, you're quite right, because we play a game sometimes with our clients, but when we're doing project mapping, and we're basically just, it's a game called Whose Waste Is It? And we all expect to do our piece, but we don't do it in a joined up way. So the responsibility, every stakeholder from front to back has a role to play in this, but it simply just doesn't join up to a level that anybody can go, I get it. And I know the importance now of doing my bit, because I know the value and I know where it ends up and I know where it goes. But the other thing, especially with regards to shelf life and stability, is we shouldn't lose sight of the fact, in all the melee that drives around sustainability, we shouldn't lose sight that packaging's primary function is to protect the product. And if we lose that from our thinking, however much sustainability stays on the agenda, then we will create bigger problems, down the line. And I think that's really important to take hold of.
Yep, some real food for thought there. And Renuka, do you have anything any closing statement you'd like to make?
Yeah, of course. So food is like everyone's responsibility. Right from the manufacturer to the consumer, everyone should be aware about what they are developing, what they are producing, and what one is eating. Also, in between them, people like us who are technically sound, who work on this, we should try educating people as much as we can by having programs. Thank you.
Okay, great. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. We learned a lot, and I hope it was useful for you guys too.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.